The sun hung low over the pine-framed fields when 8-year-old Marven Hale saw something that froze his small body in place. At first he thought it was a trick of light, maybe a fallen scarecrow, or a hunter's dummy left behind, but as he stepped closer, crunching quietly through the blanket of dry leaves, he realized it was a man. A huge man, tattooed, arms bound behind a thick tree trunk, heavy chains tightening around muscle and leather. His vest was torn, his forehead bruised, and his chest rising with slow, painful breaths. Marven's heart pounded so hard, he thought the stranger might hear it. The man wasn't just trapped, he looked like he'd been left to break in the daylight. And the strangest part was the patch on his vest, the unmistakable wings and skull of the Hells Angels, something Marven had only heard whispered about in gas stations and old men's stories. If you believe kindness and second chances can change lives in unexpected ways, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Chronicles. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts. Marven stood completely still, wrestling with an instinct to run. He knew better than to approach someone dangerous, especially someone who looked like he came straight out of the outlaw tales adults tried to hide from kids. But something about the man's faint, exhausted groan made the boy swallow fear and take another step. In that moment, the warm daylight painted everything in a strange mix of dread and compassion. Marven wasn't supposed to be in these woods, he wasn't supposed to find anything like this. But life never asked what children should or shouldn't see. Life simply dropped moments on their path and waited to see how much courage they had left in them. He dropped his school backpack and slowly inched closer. The man, massive, scarred, intimidating even in defeat, barely lifted his head. Marven could see now that his name patch read Rogue, just Rogue, nothing else. His breathing was uneven, as though every breath pressed against a wall of pain inside his ribs. The chains around him weren't thin, they were thick, industrial, wrapped around him like someone had taken great effort to ensure escape was impossible. Marven didn't know what the man had done, or who had done this to him, but right then, all he saw was someone hurting, someone who might die if ignored. He couldn't explain why his legs kept moving closer. Maybe it was his soft-hearted nature, maybe it was the loneliness he often felt since his mother began working double shifts, and his father had never been around. Maybe it was because he didn't like seeing anything or anyone alone, and suffering whatever it was, it carried him forward. He took in the scene carefully, scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of danger. No voices. No footsteps. No motorcycles. Just the warm hum of daytime insects and the occasional flutter of a bird. It was peaceful in a painfully ironic way, as if the world had chosen the calmest moment to hide something brutal. Marven felt tears sting his eyes when he noticed the man's left boot missing, and his ankles scraped raw from trying to push against the chain. Rogue wasn't just tied, he was barely hanging on. Marven knew he couldn't break chains. He knew he wasn't strong enough, old enough, or brave enough to deal with something like this. But he also knew something else. He had to do something. Doing nothing wasn't an option. Not when the man in front of him looked like he had been abandoned not just by people, but by the entire world. Marven reached into his backpack, searching for anything. The only things he had were a short, dull pocket knife, leftover apple slices, a half-full water bottle, and a worn-out superhero comic. None of it helped with chains. Still, he uncapped the water and gently lifted it toward the man's cracked lips. Rogue tried to turn his head, confused, disoriented, but Marven pressed the bottle more firmly until a few drops reached the man's mouth. The man swallowed as if water were the rarest treasure on earth. The boy wiped his palms on his jeans nervously. He knew he had to run for help. But who would believe an 8-year-old saying there was a Hell's Angel chained in the woods? His mother would panic, maybe call police, and Marven felt in his gut that police might not handle this gently or safely. He thought of the town's sheriff, who was kind but often too slow to respond. He thought of the local hunters who might just grab their guns first and ask questions later. Then he remembered the sound he had heard sometimes on weekends, a long, thundering roar of engines riding past a distant highway. There was a biker bar called Finnegan's Lookout, just a 20-minute bike ride away. Bikers always gathered there, and from the patches Marven had glimpsed from afar, he knew at least some were part of the same group Rogue belonged to. If anyone would care enough to help this man, maybe it was his own people. Marven made up his mind so quickly it scared him. He gave Rogue one last sip of water and whispered, not in words but in the silent promise of a trembling hand, that he would be back. Then he ran faster than he ever had in his life. He darted through branches, jumped over roots, pushed through brushing vines until he burst out onto the gravel path leading home. But he didn't go home. He rode his old bicycle, pedaling until his legs burned, pedaling past the old barn, past the rusted railroad crossing, past the empty road where trucks used to drive. Sweat dripped down his back. His lungs ached. His eyes kept blinking away the fear of being too late. For a kid who rarely left his neighborhood, this felt like crossing a desert, dangerous and unpredictable, but he never slowed. When he reached Finnegan's Lookout, the noise hit him like a physical force. The rumble of motorcycles, the laughter of grown men, the clinking of bottles. Leather vests glinted under the bright daylight. Patches stitched proudly across backs broad as walls. Marvin felt tiny among them, like a raindrop trying to scream in a storm. He didn't know how to approach grown men who looked like mountains, but when one biker accidentally brushed past him and he stumbled, 3 others looked down, confused, eyebrows raised at the sight of a frightened child gasping for breath on their pavement. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Chronicles so more people can witness stories of real courage and compassion. Special request, comment 1 word that describes how this story made you feel. And so on that bright day, under the wide-open sky filled with the distant echo of engines, an 8-year-old boy reminded more than 2,000 hardened riders that even in the toughest world, kindness still had the power to break chains.